Good morning. It's so nice of you to all be here so early. Thank you very much to Republica for organizing this panel. My name is Melanie Stein. I'm a journalist and a psychologist, and I can remember my school time where we were talking about epochs in history or German lessons. And I remember that as a young girl, I was stumbling upon the phrase restoration. And I thought, oh my God, those poor people who were in such a lived in such a backwards time. So there was the French Revolution, and like the citizens were like against suppression, and then suddenly constitutional monarchy, stark censorship of literature and art. That was about 15 years ago, and I was so happy to live in a time where everything is like forward-facing. Now we have 2018, and the most powerful man in the world thinks climate change is an invention of the Chinese. In Germany, people are doing arts and crafts and gardening, and the Bavarian president wants to hang up crucifixes in offices. And you know, I would like to skip forward. I would like to be in the future with the brain implants and the flying taxis and whatever. Not in a time where obviously so many people are trying to cling to deprecated ideas. And this is not a critic of conservatism. So in most societies, there's about half and half conservative and progressive thinkers, and then there's like a center of people who, depending on the question, have a conservative or progressive side on things. And this we also see in the German parliament. This is after the reunification, and so depending on the time, either the progressives or the conservatives have a small majority, and there's only just like tiny deviations. But now in the 19th parliament, we have a pretty large conservative fraction, and it's also the biggest one in absolute terms, not in relative terms, where the wild East Germans came into the country. This is not bad. Because I believe that we are all in agreement that the Constitution, we like the Constitution and that respect the democratic basic constituents. And with this parliament, we also have a party in parliament which is very authoritarian and which doubts and attacks the democratic beliefs. And like politicians from this party do not allow journalists to their meetings. They discriminate against minorities with racist remarks, or they talk about our parliament as a dictatorship. Many members of this party but are also extremist groups on the streets or online that are trying to divide this society. This is a minority. They are not many people, but our history shows us that we have to open our eyes to this development, because we know with the technical innovation, good things come, and the people get more free with the Industrial Revolution, for example, that created the possibilities for democracy. But this innovation also brought crises and ended in Nazism, National Socialism, and 2 world wars. So what can we do, journalists, politicians, civilians, what can we do that extremists do not undermine our system and bring us into a backwards-facing time? So this is the question that we want to talk about today. And so I invited the most smartest people I could find about this topic, and I'm so happy that they all said yes, and they are all here today. So with us, a linguist and cognitive scientist from the University of Berkeley. Last year at Republica, she taught us that language is never innocent, because facts are always framed in images in language. Right now she's writing a book about conservative and progressive behavior. Welcome with me, Elisabeth Wehling.
Hallo, herzlich willkommen.
Hi, welcome. All right, also with us, a man who writes about the digital methods of the right-wing populists and wrote the book Propaganda 4.0. He's a fellow with a progressive center. Welcome, Johannes Hillje.
Hallo.
Hello. I'm also happy to say a young scientist who went undercover in right-extreme and Islamistic groups and found out how Islamism and right-wing extremism are causing each other. She's a research fellow in London. And also, if some people know her face, her anonymous accounts in many right-wing extremist groups, they are not known. Welcome, Julia Ebner. And also we don't want to talk only about politics, but also with politics, so I'm happy that an SPD parliament member is here. He says about himself only about a list place he doesn't want to join, but instead he has a direct mandate. He created the Progressive Social Platform and wants to create a left-wing movement that is going across parties. Welcome, Marco Bülow.
Hallo.
Hello.
Frau Wehling, wir haben
Mrs. Wehling. So you said that you wanted to study linguistics. You were motivated because of the language of the Third Reich and the results of that. Are there parallels to today?
Is my microphone on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is my microphone on? Yeah. Okay. Of course, there's a parallel on the meta level, and that's always valid. Nevertheless, what's happening politically? Actors in society have a different level of perception what you can do with language and not, and that language is kind of political acting. And that's an understanding that's very recent in US and Europe. So that's on the meta level. There are parallels to the Third Reich, and some do more with language than others.
So in concrete, that means which terms do you recognize?
No, on the factoric level, away from the meta level. If we look to the US, to Trump, or if we look to Europe and to Germany with the AfD, of course there are terms like Lügenpresse, which means fake news, and with complete new thought buildings about language, very effective, are opened, and discussing against the linguist mainstream with full force, and well, it stays, and fake news is a tool that we know from the Third Reich as well.
And so also these terms shape the public discourse, right?
Yeah, this depends. One of the things that really always surprises me, these terms are brought into the public discussion by populists, and often there's some kind of outrage about these terms, and but there's very little perception how to deal with the situation and act in a communicative way, meaning not take these terms and reference it and repeat it always, and to what's the agenda of these groups. So we should have a strategy ourselves, how we think about free media, free public broadcast and so on in Germany, and how important is that. And that's a thing that surprises me, that there's so little, not in general, but partly thought in this direction. And there's reactive communication is not really good, and you know this from trouble in families. There's no progress with that.
Herr Bülow, you experienced the AfD in the Bundestag. How do you deal with them?
Yeah, we can continue there. That's the main strategy. they try to place topics. Nevertheless, if they make sense or not, this one entry for the parliament. Often there's not even a content there. It's not even something really disputable. But every other party is trying to use this debate to show off the AfD, and that means the AfD can take the role of the martyr, and they can place their topics, and everyone is working on that, and the media is working on that and talking about that. So the opposition and the other parties always talk about these topics and publish them in social media and other channels, and they place topics there, and the real important topics the other parties want to place, nobody talks about them, nobody argues and disputes about them, and that's what validates what we just said. It's not about the topics, but it's to pick up words and terms, topics that the AfD is trying to place, and try to talk about persons that give some topics, and in the end the right wing is profiting of that.
So you could also say we have seen that the parliament has changed and has improved. Think of Cem Özdemir talk. Does it have something positive as well? So I have to say that I don't share this euphoria about talks against the AfD, like from the Greens and the CDU, but they are always defensive. They're not about the party's own topic. It's only about the old parties are just like positioning themselves against the AfD, but the topics are always presented by the AfD, not by the old or regular parties. But also I want to bring in another aspect. So there's the agenda setting that Marco talked about. So AfD puts topics onto the agenda, but in communicative science, there's also a thing called second-level agenda setting. So where it's not about the topics, but of the aspects, like how do we talk about a topic and how do we look at a topic. And this is a bit more subliminal even, and harder to identify. And there's a few topics there who are needed to be discussed, and they're put on the agenda by the AfD, like maybe flight and refugee and migration. But how we talk about this topic is pretty talked about by the AfD, and in the parliament there's a huge debate of like who can we put away and like we are talking about mass immigration, which is not true. And the things we have to discuss is integration. How do we integrate the people who are here and won't be able to get back so soon? And that is a subliminal communicative success of the AfD, that they actually put forth the aspects of this debate that they want to. You said in your book that the right wing also can tell better stories. So how can other politicians tell their stories better? So first of all,
they pick topics that are there and that are not discussed enough and that don't find place in the big political discourse, especially in Germany, because of the history of Germany, a special factor. And they have simple explanations and simple solutions, and try to, for very complex topics and dynamics that are overwhelming for a lot of people today, and this is very black and white, so that's very attractive for younger people. They witness these technological advances and changes. The distribution of these topics is using the digital medias and to place it in the middle of the society, and step by step they try to influence the political agenda, and they have handbooks for that. They are using for that, and try to use social media mechanisms to place topics, and they agree on hashtags behind the curtain and backstage to place things very subtle in the mainstream. Frau Ebner just said there's a difference between groups, and they just offer very direct, easy solutions. And with that, they reach the mainstream of society. And one thing we know from research there, people distinguish by psychological predispositions. So there's this direct causality and indirect causality. And if you're more conservative and more authoritarian, then you have the psychological preference for that. It's not related to politics, but it's just a given in your head, in your mind, where you can just pick up people. It's not totally.
So yeah, like it's very easy to say like we have these simple solutions to pick up these people who think causally, and if we talk to people who think directly causally about sexism, global warming, and poor people, if we talk to these people and give them a framing that takes a complex topic and expresses it in direct causality language, so that brings them towards a progressive position, that actually works. So the point I'm trying to make is that directly causal is a psychologic mechanism that happens on a certain layer, and the question which content do I put on there is a secondary question which can be used for various political directions. So you don't have to be in this one ideologic part. So which is your concrete tip for Mr. Bülow to place his topics and not talk about other people's topics? So I'd say have a huge lunch and then let's start. No, let me correct myself. It's not about talking, but it's a very dense field. So science here about progressive and conservatism acting and how language rules this is a huge field. But just in short, just very clear ideas. You wanted to hear certain political ideas can be communicated more easily than they are done right now. Like for example, saving the environment. We can say like global warming is a complex topic and it has so many parts and abstract language. Or we can say we have to save water, earth, and air. And one thing to do that are these simple steps. And of course, this is to the detriment of the fully abstract showing of a political situation. But try to be in a discourse, in somewhere to talk about these abstract things. Instead, you will never be understood. So what I say is like, don't simplify the solutions. Don't get untruths in there. But sometimes you can be in more progressive discussions. You can be way more concrete regarding language. Like for example, say like saving the environment or saving air, water, and earth. So one of them is the question of the formulating stuff, and the other is the content. I wonder, is it the only thing that helps to defend against the extremists, to have a positive vision of the future and also a party that shows me, yes, we got it, we have it in our hands, we understand what's happening. We experienced Andrea Nahles last year. She was against the basic income, and she repeated that in Spiegel last week. Very rational and stuff like that. But I wonder sometimes, and this is not only about the SPD, of course, but other parties as well, I have the feeling that they think very much in 4-year cycles. But right now I need a party that deals with the big topics. How, Mr. Bülow, do you want to, with your party, deal with these topics?
I think the parties got weaker there because and allowed the AfD in the parliament because they unlearned using normal language with the people directly over the usual topics, but because they are more in the headspace and they are not from acting from their guts, and of course because they're lacking the vision. They work on topics in all areas, whether left or right, and I think that's a mistake there. I think every party is very conservative in their structure, and there's not only left and right. It's we don't have progressive and structurally conservative, and that's maybe provocant now. The AfD is offering something that's not conservative in their structure, and every other party is responding to that with the usual mechanisms, and you can't answer with that anymore, and the people are bored by that and don't want this anymore, and they don't want that three people are giving the agenda and everyone is just cheering to that, and say, hey, that's totally great what they said, whether they like it or not. And people say, hey, they are just lying to us, and they are interchangeable. That's not right, of course, but that's the thing we show to them, and that's why I think we need to crack up the structures there. We need to talk others. We need to make politics in a different way. We need to have more discussions and communication. We need to reach out to people with a simpler language. There are voting districts. There, the people are very well educated and earning very well, and 80-90% go to the elections. And then there's other districts. They just have participation levels of 30%. And that's where we need to act. And that's the people we lost, basically, and that's why I founded this progressive platform. We want to create some pressure there, and we want to, kick every party in the butt to make them act.
We will go back to that in a minute, but right now I want to take a step back. And Mrs. Ebner, you've researched a lot in extremist groups. So if I'm a journalist and go to a thing like Merkel Must Go demo, then I see that in almost of these things, people say like, I'm not a Nazi. And then there's a thing like, oh, but I have Greek roots, or my wife is Asian. Who are these new right-wing people? What are they, and why are they so successful online? So first of all, it doesn't only happen in Germany, but it's a global trend, especially in the US, alt-right. The alt-right movement has also made this rebranding that is happening on the right as like counterculture that is against the establishment and distances itself from the traditional neo-Nazi right-wing groups. And they know that they have to put a focus on language. This is a very, very special strategy that they use, how not to be shown as anti-Semitic and how to present their image in a very good way on events. Like, for example, in Charlottesville in the US, there were exact orders how people have to be dressed, what they should say. And the same is happening in Great Britain with the football lions, for example, and also in the identity movement in Germany and the new right movements in Germany and Austria. And this is a dynamic that worries us in the institute in our institute a lot, because these movements use this to make themselves bigger than they really are, and combined with very smart internet strategy that they share. That they see this as an information war or narrative war, and it shows that the other movements, they are ahead of the other movements, and they're very successful in using language melting language to their part, and so making old phrases fashionable again by being very strategic about this. And so not only language is part of this, but also to go very deep on a civil level to find sympathizers, and they were way better on this. And they're really good with they play in the hands of the AfD with these, of course, and Bernd Höcke. So in the middle of the AfD, he has a preference for the even right-wing people, and they really play in their hands and redefine the political agenda, because they know in the social media how to place their topics there. into the trends. And this information war that they wage is against the old parties, but also against the fake news lying press. And this is something that is very attractive because it's happening in a playful way. So even especially young people are motivated because they are not very political in the beginning, but they just want to take part because it's kind of fun, and this culture factor and this internet culture factor.
We described these mechanisms, how they hide this, but how do I identify this? If I listen to that, most of this is very okayish, and what makes them dangerous?
So the exciting thing is, like, if you look at in these channels, it looks very different than what actually reaches the public. And so this is very targeted marketing style that ends up in the social media. So there's anti-Semitic theories. There's like violence, there's right-wing extreme troll armies. Like the biggest one has about 10,000 members, and it had also they've been removed from Discord, but they always pop up in a new form. And of course, there everything is shared, like from Mein Kampf to Julius Eberle, and so everything, the whole. And also like racist, like race, biological explanations, like why are the white people better than others, how white genocide happens, like all these conspiracy theories. And this is not talked about in the public, of course. In the public, what they make public, and they are very methodic, and so they pose topics that they know they will mobilize a lot of people, like migration, terrorism. This is everything that is like the normal people are afraid of, and like in a legitimate way as well, because they're topics that us moves as well.
Hillje, you dealt with the online strategies of right-wing populists. Why are they so successful on the web? First of all, that's a question of resource. The AfD, but other right-wing populist parties, since their foundation, digital media was their central communication channel, and they extended their activities there. They wanted to circumvent the mainstream media, of course, and wanted to communicate directly with the people. For one reason, of course, in forums and networks of the AfD, they share their positions and provocations, but they created some kind of collective identity, and that's really working very well in social media, social networks, because you can create homogeneous groups, and the collective identity the AfD created is something like we against the evil system, we against the established parties, established medias, and so on. And they have this victim role they like, and that's really between their followers, and that creates some kind of sense of community. I've been in a closed Facebook group with 23,000 members, and I've been there, and Perksen yesterday said there's filter bubbles are not really existing. I agree, but there's something like a collective judgment, collective reception of the information and news. They read Spiegel Online, Taz, left-wing media in Germany, but they are judging and valuing this news with a narrative. The established media wants to persuade us by this and that, and this strengthens this sense of community. We are lied to, and the AfD finally says something against that and towards that. And this is an interesting process you need to observe, because this collective identity is based on many anti-democratic aspects and perceptions, and it's anti-pluralistic.
Mr. Bülow, you have created the social progressive platform. What do you want to? Do you want to move against the right wing online, or what is behind that? So it's of course there for, on the one hand, to create something that is like against the right wing online, but also like different. We don't want to react to them, but we want to set topics. We want to set the topics that are actually important, and this is actually a problem that we have. And not only like an elite in the society, but this is a problem that people actually have locally. And of course, this is harder to explain because, like just like having a debate about, for example, it's like find some people who are like whose fault it is, but it is easy. But like it's harder to explain how everything fits together. But you cannot only react. Like you can find your own topics.
It means have you planned something concrete?
We said we wanted to start if we are 5,000, so that's reach. So things are starting. So we started to ask our supporters, what are your topics? And below the topics, so social state, but also social start. And in short sentences, because that makes it easy, and that's what we are like accumulating. And so over a quarter of our supporters replied. So I like that because it's very high, and this is how we are trying to create the topics from that. What we also have to do, and that's like the big difference, is we have to say like, what did we do wrong? Because if you only say like show like what you did right, and there's maybe a little correction, and we do maybe a little thing different, but everything went awesome, then no one will believe us. We will not reach people. But instead, you have to say like what went wrong, where is a problem in politics, where is a problem with media, what should not be able to happen. So only if you are able to do that without using the AfD tactics, because you don't want to strengthen them, but if you find ways to criticize ourselves from ourselves, like you might just start with yourselves, and then you have like believability, and just like don't just say like how nice the SPD is, but only like, oh yeah, we gotta start and then in 40 years we're not having a big coalition. But if you say like, okay, this and this and this, that's what I did, and that might be wrong, and this is what we did in the party, and we might have changed that, then you have a certain openness, and that's what we want to reach. Especially even though the platform doesn't go into the direction of one party, like we have like non-party members and well, so we want to start a movement. That's going to be hard because there's so many splinter groups, but there's also more and more people who say like, yeah, just leave me alone with those parties, but I want to do something. And just catching these and like collecting these people, there's like DM and DIP, and there's so many good initiatives, and there's like people who create new parties, and they all do nice things, but just like putting all of this together and like creating some pressure that is visible, that is going to be an important goal.
Okay, can I say something to that? In the Progressive Center, we did a study where we went to structurally weak regions with higher levels of populist voters, and we talked to them, and we called them the political left, left alone, and meaning in these areas parties really closed their offices, and what the AfD does, they do some satellite people offices where basically member of parliament in Saxony has 3 different offices in different regions, and the SPD did the opposite thing. They has more persons in the parliament, but they have fewer offices, and this creates the feeling of being left alone, left back, and that's the thing that's really missing, and we can't leave these people alone. We need a physical presence there where the people are disappointed, and next to all these digital things, we need to think about this as well, and that's maybe even more important.
One more sentence about this that helps with this, like it's also with us like this. I come from Dortmund, and we have areas where like votership is below 50%, and we have a high rate of unemployment, and many people have feel rejected, and like my local area, there's various politicians. There's so many politicians, but they're all centrally in one office somewhere where people don't reach, and that's the wrong way. We need to go into the area. We need to distribute ourselves, not only in this office, but we want to go there where people shout at us, because that's the only way. If you release that, then it's clear that people either don't vote or they vote for the people who want to do everything differently.
Apropos being insulted, as a journalist with an NDR microphone in your hand, it happens again and again that people just insult you as fake news media, and I can't really. I don't really understand that, because we have very critical media and great journalism, and all this propaganda is really anchored very deep. And Frau Wehling, you mentioned the word fake news. Do we journalists need a lobby or something like that?
Okay, so every citizen, whether being a journalist or not, is should be honest with themselves in language and thought. And of course, this is what we said already. There's the huge problem that is in the media, but also with normal citizens. I count myself with them or with politicians. The question is, in this democracy, is everyone honest with themselves in language and thought? And the media, journalism, for example, if they are all about free and critical coverage, then of course they need a lobby, but they are that lobby themselves, but never in a way that I'm selling my fellow citizens an image of myself that I'm not, but instead, let me talk about these topics. So we had the topics of racism, how was racist thought propagated in the society, but also the other point is are parties still relevant? And one thing that I think problematic is that many politicians just follow the surveys, and so they go out and they ask what do people want, and then they create talks about this. And I think that is undemocratic, because it's kind of like a lie. Political actors need to say what they are for, and here I'm putting the connection to racism. So AfD in German has, at the same time with the racist thoughts, they also did a huge communication thing against political correctness. This was a communication strategy that was started by Bülow, and this is about meta and context. So there was a strategy to defame political context while speaking anti-Semitic and sexist and racist. And how did we react? By having talk shows about, is political correctness important, or are we too politically correct? So what are we doing? We're taking those ideas of the AfD and talk about them in 60 minutes on the air. What we don't do is a show about, should we hate using language? So it's the same facts. It was a different topic. And just shortly, I like it if you can put a bit of empathy in there. So there was a study about this question: can we talk about, can we use language to really make people hate each other? And what people did was they told the experiments, so just go to the next room, please. Your coworker is there, but he just had to leave for a second to call on the phone. And now on the floor there was a backpack that was supposed to belong to the coworker. So now they sent 3 words to the problem. So there was to Rome, like a typical black name. Once asshole and once the N-word, and so in microseconds, so it didn't enter the conscious, only in the subconscious. Tyrone, asshole, and the N-word, and so they put them into the next room and they asked how do they how do they actually move around? So the people with Tyrone, so like a black American like citizen, were sitting next to the backpack. The people with the word asshole were sitting next to the backpack. But the problems with the keyword N-word were like moving away from the backpack. So this is an example for that defaming using language is like exactly like moving directly subconsciously into thoughts and actions. So the debate about like which words that we use, that debate has been is like done, is a done thing in empirical terms, but it's not a debate, but it's a public debate where we have created such TV shows, and that is a problem.
One question to the audience. If you compare right-wing terrorism and Islamic terrorism, what do you think? Which happens more? Who thinks we have more Islamic terrorism? Please raise your hand. Question from the audience. More victims or more... Okay, the majority thinks that right-wing terrorism is more. You know you know the exact numbers. What's behind that, and what's the task for the journalism there? Okay, there's a huge difference in the way media deals with different kinds of extremistic attacks worldwide, and there's no definition of terrorism, no universal definition, which led to terroristic attacks or jihadistic attacks were instantly branded as terrorism, and right-wing attacks that are politically motivated and have been done on purpose, which should trigger the checklist. How we define terrorism, what's the consensus in terrorism research. All these criteria are met, but nevertheless, media was not calling it terrorism or attack, and it doesn't even get in the headlines if it's not called like that, and that leads to different perception and to underestimate the threat done by right-wing groups. And their Freiteiler Gruppe, also society who doing attacks, but also the not violent extremistic groups we have, also on an Islamistic side, of course, which is very much talked upon, that delivering the ideological inspiration for lone wolf and before the wall in
for the vote in Italy, for example, there was a guy who went against a black Italian friend or person, and so in the last few years there was various attacks also in Germany. There was some of them were like prevented, but the fact is that language plays a certain association, or has created a certain association where we equate terrorism with Islamism and not with right-wing extremism. This is something where we see that, that Donald Trump's language is not very helpful. Like, he shortened the budget for all other forms of extremism, except Islamic terrorism, and all this focus on jihadistic group since 9/11 also led to right-wing groups being able to push their strategies and find no pushback against positioning themselves in a very harmless way. One addition, because that's also exciting the current debate. We're talking about anti-Semitism a lot, and also there you get the question that anti-Semitism is only from Islamic groups, or that's the idea for some people. Like, some people wrote that, and even a very prominent journalist in the Zeit magazine is said that anti-Semitism in Germany was over, and now it's imported, and I think that's a very difficult way to debate this. Absolutely, yes. Especially like anti-Semitic things in these conspiracy theories, and that's something I talk about in my book as well. How the two enforce each other and have the same narratives and the same stories and use the same strategies. And the anti-Semitism element, you also find that in many things where neo-Nazis went to IS or cooperated with IS or cooperated between right-wing extremists and IS sympathizers, like the Nordadler group, where there was one case of contacts to IS sympathizers who had a member of the Nordadler, who met a member of the Nordadler National Socialist circles. So this is happening, and because of the narratives are so similar, because both parties speak of a conflict between races and cultures, so and like an inevitable war between the Islam and the West. Because of that, they of course play into each other's hands. So we talked a lot about what could politicians do better and what could journalists do better. The name of this Republica is Power of People. So I want to give you all the offer, like, do you want to talk to the viewers? What can every one of us do so that extremists cannot attack democracy? Who wants to start?
Okay, then I will start. Let's continue the road then. I think we all, and I include myself there, underestimate the relevance of small, everyday communication. And the question is there a difference when I'm sitting in the taxi? Today morning I was coming here by taxi, and my taxi driver was talking about the bad immigrants and foreigners. And I feel responsible for that. Okay, I feel responsible in this lecture, not in a university hall, to oppose that by language, because the opposing that by language is the opposing by thought as well, and all this the taxi drive, if we wait in line at the imbiss, food court, whatever, we talk to each other, and that is the moments that for ourselves, but also for the other people, shape the world and shape what's okay in the world, and we all should mirror there that specific things are not okay there. We can use that by using language, and it's really important to say things like, I don't know, I get you really are enraged by political correctness and so on, but I think it hurts me, it hurts my heart if I see that someone else is hurt by that, and that touches me, and I think specific kinds of language I wouldn't use. That's my example. It's very abstract a bit, but I think it's okay, and you get the point. And for my everyday life is that, and I include myself because also as myself, I'm not really opposing that every time, but we should do, and the more often we oppose that and discuss against that, the better.
Also ich habe persönlich gerade die Europawahl vor allem im Blick. Das ist nächstes Jahr Ende Mai und
Okay, so at the end of May, there's the Europe Party movement, and right-wing populists have a very strong ideas of narratives about Europe, and us who are more or less pro-Europe are a bit unsure, like how do we position ourselves, because we want to move in a pro-European way, in an emotional way. We want to talk about the vote, about this vote advertisements also in a private way, and of course that's where like it can be easier to convince people regarding compared to the media. But like let's talk about Europe. So 2014 I was working for the Green Party on the Europe level. So experience what happens before and after the vote. So 2014 when I came to Europe, the pro-Europeans were those who wanted to continue developing Europe. Like they were talking about the concept of the United States of Europe or the European socialists and stuff like that. And they were like, and today, like the thought about pro-Europe is something very different. Like after the vote in the Netherlands, they were saying like the Netherlands are continuing in a pro-European course because Mark Rutte won the vote. But what he actually said is in his program was like European competences, remove them and put them back into the national layer. Sebastian Kurz from Austria calls himself a pro-European, but from his program, he's more for a Europe of fatherlands and strong national states and not a very strong European layer. So there I saw that like people have actually taken away a term from me, this pro-European, because that's the people who wanna. That's not those people. That's the people who wanna more. You want more of Europe, and I would really like if this term, and that deserves more applause, and I would be really happy if this term we would reclaim and rework this term so it stands for more Europe and not the keeping the status quo, because that is not very good right now.
Do you like to continue? Yeah. I would say we shouldn't play into the hands of extremists, and you have they have two concrete strategies to
zum Beispiel manchmal lassen sie den Eindruck entstehen, als seien sie wirklich einfach viel, viel mehr und nützen die sozialen Medien.
They use social media for their purposes to to threaten journalists, activists, and the normal user. So we need to show courage there, and we need to have courage to oppose that. And there's some good initiatives like Ich bin hier or Vieles Democracy, and some other initiatives we have in the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, and Antonio Stiftung, and Facebook. We try to empower this civil courage there, and we need to be more loud, and the center of society needs to be more loud, so the edges are smaller and don't have this echo chamber effect anymore to influence the debates and the discourse. That's the thing we should do. Yeah, I think direct approach, direct talk, if there's topics involved, should happen. You don't need even to be discriminated, but you can also involve yourself into debates with your neighbor or in a store, something like that. And we should try to not jump on topics that is set by right wings, and to just don't do that, and instead of that place an own topic. It's hard even for myself, I know, but not retreat things by right wings, and yeah, to be active, to get more active, become an activist, come to a platform or in the web or something. But there are so many groups that do something. I think it's time for that, and who thinks now to retreat to its own private area is sleeping, and I think it's not a good approach to do that, and we shouldn't get used to that. That the AfD is in the parliament, and that there's always some outrage. It makes it harder for us all, and we all need to do something against that.
Dann bedanke ich mich ganz herzlich für diese
Thank you very much for this interesting panel. Thanks for your time. If you're interested in this topic, we'll continue here with civil courage and the web, so please stay. Otherwise, have a lot of fun at the Republica. Bye.